Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry Murray.
I'm Jonna Johnson. Help yourself to a virtual donut sourced entirely within the U.S. so as not to run afoul of U.S. FCC rules. And join us as we race through this week's tech news. We've got product announcements from Cloudflare and Amazon, networking updates in the Linux kernel, financial results from ASML and TSMC, space networking news, and more.
And today's episode is brought to you by the North American Network Operators Group, or NANOG. They meet 3 times a year. The next gathering is NANOG 97 in Bellevue, Washington, June 1st through the 3rd. You can register today to attend at nanog.org, and we'll tell you more about why you should later in the show. And before we get into Red Alert and the news, just a reminder, the Packet Pushers have a merch store. So if you're looking to refresh your spring wardrobe, we have t-shirts, hats, socks, water bottles, and more. It's all at store.packetpushers.net. You can get items with the Packet Pushers logo or the logo of your favorite podcast, like maybe this one.
Yes, that would be great. And also many thanks. A quick shout out to the listener who wrote in to say that Network Break was their absolutely favorite podcast and they would listen to it every day of the week. That made us feel really good, although there's no way we could do it every day of the week. But thank you. Thank you for writing in and saying that.
Yeah, much appreciated.
All right, let's get started with the Red Alert. There were 1,304 CVEs created in the week ending 17 April and 23,145 updated. If you're a regular listener, you will notice that these numbers keep going up and up. Yes, that is the case, and it is a problem. Of the newly created CVEs, 163 were critical, scoring at 9 or higher on the CVSS scale, and 32 got a perfect 10 out of 10. This week's Red Alert goes to a trio of CVEs for Cisco ISE, CVEs 2026, 2147, 180, and 186. 180 and 186 each allow an authenticated attacker to execute arbitrary commands on the device, thanks to our good old buddy, insufficient validation of user-supplied input. An attacker gets user-level access to the underlying OS and then can elevate privileges to root, and in doing so, makes some systems ignore all other devices, leading to a denial-of-service attack. 147 is similar, but applies to authenticated user IDs with admin rights. Altogether now, Cisco has released patches, so the solution here is update with those patches as soon as possible.
That's right. All right, let's dive into some news. We'll start with Cloudflare. They've updated its Cloudflare One portfolio to let customers set up private networks for AI agents. They're calling this Cloudflare Mesh. The service is available with Cloudflare's SASE offering. So the way it works is Cloudflare Mesh uses node and client software to connect users, agents, and resources via private IP addresses. So for example, if you are running an AI agent on a Mac Mini at home, but you are out and you want to run a job, you can use Mesh to access the agent from your laptop or your mobile phone. You can also set up Mesh nodes on-prem and in cloud VPCs to allow agents to connect to internal and external resources and services. All of the traffic goes across Cloudflare's network, which means users can apply traffic rules and inspection policies using Cloudflare Gateway and its SASE offering. So that gives you things like DNS filtering, CASB, firewalling, and DLP. This client software runs on laptops, phones, and desktops. The node software can run on a Linux server or in a VM, and Cloudflare says a Docker image will be available later this year. Note that the Mesh agent and the Mesh node aren't new. They are rebranded versions of the Warp client and Warp connector.
Interesting. Drew, any thoughts on how they instantiate the security for this? I mean, it's private. How do they contain the agents? You know, I mean, I know you mentioned it. You can apply things like DNS filtering, CASB, firewalling, and DLP, but how does it all come together? That, to me, smells like just a buzzword of acronyms.
Well, because you are essentially setting up, I'm sure they probably wouldn't want to use the word VPN, but it is essentially a secure connection between the agent, whatever it's running on, and the endpoint resource it's trying to connect to, all going through Cloudflare's SASE offering.
So they're basically doing filtering based on location, not content or behavior.
I think that depends on what SASE services you're getting from Cloudflare, because they can do things like DLP and DNS filtering. So it's not just, the state of the endpoint. It is that sort of full SASE suite.
Okay, interesting.
It is interesting. And I think, obviously all the vendors have recognized agentic AI as a wonderful new attack surface for them to try to help you deal with. I'm not sure about Cloudflare's, market share in SASE. But I think they do also have services you can buy to help you actually build AI agents and AI tools. So if you're already sort of in that ecosystem, maybe you also want to join in here. Don't know, but it is Cloudflare definitely making an effort to keep up with the rest of the SASE vendors. All right, moving on, but sticking with Cloudflare, the company also announced a partnership with Wiz. Wiz is a cloud-native application protection platform, or CNAPP. This service, this combo lets you discover LLM endpoints and monitor and protect AI traffic. And if you haven't heard of Wiz, they were acquired by Google in 2025 for $32 billion in an all-cash transaction. Wiz is now part of Google Cloud. And through the partnership, Cloudflare says customers can use Cloudflare's AI security for apps alongside the Wiz service. So you can do things like inventory all the LLM endpoints across your web property, including those ones you didn't know about, the shadow AI. You can inspect AI traffic in real time to do things like look for PII or spot prompt injections. You can also map how data is moving among your AI apps and models and verify that guardrails are in place.
Interesting. So I think this actually answers my broader question from the previous announcement, because they're bringing all those Google capabilities to monitoring AI behavior. So presumably one could combine the two offerings that we just talked about and get some very powerful security protection for AI.
I would assume so, yeah.
Yeah. All right. And in more cloud news, AWS is debuting its Interconnect. On April 14th, AWS announced general availability of a managed connectivity services offering called Interconnect, which allows console-based creation of WAN links to AWS Virtual Private Circuits VPCs. Two flavors are available: AWS Interconnect Multi-Cloud and AWS Interconnect Last Mile. Multi-Cloud takes care of the AWS and infrastructure sides of creating a layer 3 link between AWS VPCs and equivalents in other competitive IaaS environments, create the necessary networking constructs in the VPC, like a direct connect gateway, and allocates capacity on the private network between AWS's backbone and the other providers. You still need to do some configuration on the other cloud's console, but it works initially with Google, with Azure, and OCI connectivity to be delivered later this year. So that's actually quite an interesting one that strikes me as a defensive maneuver here, saying, hey, if you're thinking about using one of the other providers, you don't have to leave us to do that, which I think is actually a very smart move. And then they have a last mile version, which is a similar level of click and go provisioning for direct connect links to customer prem, so you can connect to your on-prem data center over existing telco last mile connectivity. You can provision 1 to 100 gig links and adjust bandwidth without reprovisioning. They claim you can get 5 nines reliability, and they bundle CloudWatch for service monitoring. Last Mile is available in the U.S. East Coast region initially. Yay, U.S. East Coast. For Lumen customers, with AT&T and Megaport in the works. So if you're out on the West Coast, you may have to wait a little bit, and I don't know what's going to happen globally, but that still is of interest.
Okay, so it sounds like for the last mile, of course, they're partnering with service providers and telcos who already have that capacity, those actual physical lines. But do you know for this AWS Interconnect for the WAN side, or is this going over AWS entirely owned fiber or infrastructure, or are they also leasing from telcos and service providers?
I don't know for sure, but I think certainly for last mile, they're leasing. For the multi-cloud, they can be going through a range of different things. So there's a lot of different ways they're doing it, and I don't know exactly their core architecture, but I don't get the sense that they're getting in the telco business. It's more they're getting in the telco provisioning business, which is kind of weird, because you would think the telcos should kind of, after 100 years or so, know how to provision their own stuff, but here we are.
I mean, that's been like sort of a long-term complaint about telcos and service providers, right? Just how long it takes to get something stood up. So if AWS, I think one of the things that AWS is good at is just simplifying all of that stuff. I guess if they're not entirely freezing out the telcos and service providers by, using that infrastructure, this is good for the telcos and service providers in the long term?
It's not, because the margins on, when AWS buys stuff in bulk, the margins are way lower than when individual enterprises buy it.
Right.
So, the telcos have been fighting a decades-long fight to not be commoditized, and they're slowly losing, which is kind of frustrating. But, the idea is I'm more than just wire or fiber. Well, actually, maybe you aren't, right?
I think at some point they just, I don't know, maybe they just need to embrace it and roll with it and do the best they can to make their money in that environment, because it is still something that needs to happen. But they've
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And I do think a lot of the satellite agreements are going in the right direction because at the end of the day, I want my cell phone to work. I don't really care if it is working on a satellite or cellular or whatever.
Mhm.
I don't care if it's 5G or 8G or 27G. I just want it to work. And the telcos are uniquely positioned to deliver that level of connectivity and probably charge for it. So,
like there's nothing wrong with just being a pipe, right? We
Right.
need pipes. It's okay.
yes, pipes are good. Yes.
Yeah. Right. Links in the show notes. We'll move on. The 7.0 version of Linux has been officially released, and the new version comes with significant networking-related upgrades. At the top of the list is Accurate Explicit Congestion Notification, or I'm just going to call it AccECN. I don't know if that's right or not. But is now on by default in TCP settings in the Linux kernel. AccECN improves on traditional ECN by signaling the precise amount of congestion a receiver is experiencing, not just that congestion is happening. This means the sender can more precisely modify how much traffic they're sending to that person signaling or that device signaling I've got congestion. Note, if one of the two ends of the TCP connection doesn't support AccECN, they'll drop back to traditional ECN automatically. Some other networking upgrades in the kernel include optimization to minimize performance bottlenecks in UDP and an updated network scheduler that can run across multiple CPU cores instead of being tied to a single core.
Interesting. Yeah, the congestion thing gives me hives slightly because managing congestion by telling somebody there's congestion is a bit of a swamp because you can create congestion by telling the other end that there's congestion. So I'm glad they're making it a little more precise, but it still gives me hives. But the other two announcements sound really good.
I don't know if it makes you feel better, but ECN has been around since like 2001. It is an IETF standard.
No, it's been there forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and AccECN is also an ITF. I don't know if it's a standard yet, but there is a working group around it. So they are trying to put, those standardized guardrails in it. So I understand hives though, yeah.
Yeah, because, basically, if you've ever been driving on the interstate in the United States and you see a sign that says congestion ahead, whether there is or isn't, that sign will create congestion.
Congested, that's a good point. All right, links in the show notes and a quick break to tell you about our sponsor, NANOG, the North American Network Operators Group. NANOG is one of the premier NOGs on the planet. NANOG 97 is June 1st through the 3rd in Bellevue, Washington. So what goes on at NANOG? The format is educational talks and workshops from people who are on the cutting edge of network, along with social events and a peering forum, so you can get some human networking done. And speaking of talks, program talks include designing for constrained environments. One's called From CLI to AI, a network engineer's guide to building useful agents. There's also DWDM, optical networking concepts and technologies, and many more. At NANOG, you get hands-on practical knowledge from people that have done it, are doing it, or who are figuring out how to do it. All the content is by and for engineers, so you're hearing from people you might not have otherwise had access to, and you can go talk to them afterwards. The hallway track is one of the highlights of these events. You can register for NANOG 97 now. It's happening June 1st through the 3rd. Just go to nanog.org, click on the events link, and you can figure out the rest from there. Just go to nanog.org, nanog.org, and we thank NANOG for being a sponsor.
And I just want to give one last plug for NANOG. I have not been, but all of the people that I know that are regulars are incredibly cool people. Smart, unpretentious, fun to hang around with, fun to have a beer with. So, if you have the opportunity to go, I would strongly encourage it. Yeah,
and NANOG Packet Pushers was the media sponsor for NANOG 96, the previous one, and Ethan went and he said it was amazing. Just so much good information. Yeah. So, go check it out.
Yep. And moving right along, OpenAI has paused its Stargate UK project. This is the LLM giant OpenAI. They announced last week that they put their plans for massive data center expansion in the UK on hold. Their ostensible concerns are rising energy costs and the regulatory environment in the UK, particularly around copyright. Gosh, people want to maintain ownership of what they've created.
Isn't it a little late to be worried about copyright at this point?
Well, actually, no, different countries and different regions have different rules. And if they've gotten very stringent about it, then OpenAI may want to back off.
I guess if OpenAI actually has physical space in the UK could be like, here comes the hammer.
Exactly. That's exactly it. If this pause becomes permanent, the affected locations are the UK government's northeastern AI growth zone, which is centered on North Tynesdale or Tinsdale, and Blyth or Blythe and Northumberland. If you are a UK listener and I have butchered the pronunciation, please let me know.
Packetpushers.net/FU.
There you go. OpenAI's Stargate UK partner Nscale had expected to supply OpenAI with infrastructure to the tune of up to 8,000 NVIDIA GPUs in the first quarter of 2026, which is now over, with the potential to scale to 31,000 NVIDIA GPUs over time, but that hasn't happened so far this year and now looks far less certain. We have links in the show notes, but I gotta wonder, OpenAI was also making all kinds of noises about how it had committed to $1 trillion worth of infrastructure, to which the CEO of IBM pointed out quite reasonably that the entire global revenue of AI did not cover the cost. Actually, the entire global profits, not revenue, profits did not cover the cost of interest on $1 trillion loan. So possibly this was a bit ambitious. So I am suspecting that they discovered they bit off a little more than they can chew, and they're sort of gotten some face-saving excuses as to why they're not going forward with this.
I mean, in some ways, I don't have a lot of respect for OpenAI, but I do think this may not be so much a face-saving exercise as running into the wall of reality. We are hearing about the main constraint right now being access to electricity, to energy grids. There just isn't enough capacity to support all of the proposed, data centers coming online. So that could entirely be true. And of course, OpenAI's behavior around copyright, the UK and the European Union are more stringent about that. So
it could be true, but Occam's razor says, look, this is the same company that just asked the U.S. government to backstop its $1 trillion loan. So I'm going with they're running out of money for this stuff, not the very legitimate, hey, I've got concerns about the regulatory environment and the availability of energy. Because basically, if that's actually true, that means they're really idiots because they didn't pay any attention to the regulatory environment or the availability of electricity when they announced the plans. And like you, I don't have a huge amount of respect for them, but I think they would have figured out the basics as part of the plan before they announced it.
A lot of these companies, I feel like, are of the mindset of, just do it and ask for forgiveness later if we need to. And they also are fantastic at spouting all kinds of amazing pronouncements that may or may not work out in the future. So yeah, I guess I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
I'm going with they don't have the money and they'd rather blame the UK. So
I bet they do have. I feel like the fact that we're not talking about this, but the fact that Allbirds can pivot from a shoe company to an AI company and see their stock price go up, there seems to be a lot of foolishness around in regard to throwing money at AI. I don't think...
but having a stock price go up doesn't amount to cash on the barrelhead. And literally, if there isn't enough global profits to pay the interest on the loan to one company,
yes,
that's like me announcing that I'm going to build $1 billion data center in my little county. I can announce all I want, but nowhere in my bank account could I even pay interest on $1 billion loan. It's just not happening.
Right. Yeah. So, I guess, there is definitely we'll keep raising money and see how far we can push this till the money runs out.
Right.
And it's worked so far, but eventually you will hit a wall. Yeah.
It's the nature of a bubble. Anyhow.
All right. A few episodes back, we talked about the U.S. Federal Communications Commission banning consumer routers produced fully or partly outside the United States, claiming that these devices represent unacceptable risks to the security of the United States and U.S. persons. At the same time, the FCC said it will allow the Defense Department and the Homeland Security Department to issue exemptions on the ban. And last week, the FCC announced exemptions for Netgear and AdTran, specifically for Netgear Nighthawk and Orbi routers and Netgear cable gateways and cable modems. AdTran service delivery gateways also scored an exemption. The big question is why? It's not clear. Every consumer router includes components made outside the U.S., and most manufacturing assembly also happens outside the U.S. I will note the FCC has outlined the requirements of the exemption application process, which include the corporate structure of the company to make sure you're headquartered in the U.S. They want a detailed supply chain inventory. They want to know the country of origin for all components. And they want a plan for how the company will initiate or expand onshore manufacturing. I guess I have a couple concerns. One is that this approval process feels ripe for manipulation. I feel like it gives the U.S. government leverage over companies that can be unequally or unfairly applied. I don't have any evidence that this happened in this case. Netgear says it went through the application process and got approved. So, they did jump through the hoops that were presented to them. My other question is, okay, but is there a way to demonstrate that these approved devices are now more materially safe than they were before this process? That is not clear to me.
Yeah, and Drew, I have to agree with you. One of my pet peeves is anytime somebody creates so-called standards for, or qualifications that are fundamentally just requirements. In other words, if I say you need to be able to do this so that we can feel confident that you have the strength or the security or anything else to do some other thing, the problem is you have to very clearly demonstrate the connection between your requirements and what it is you're trying to get done. I mean,
Right.
and it doesn't seem like there's any transparency here. There's nothing that says you need to check these boxes because this box means this box means this box means this. And then they should be actually sharing this information publicly, transparently.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's a deep, dark secret, except the only logic would be, well, if we tell everybody, then the hackers will know. And the point is, you got to assume the hackers know already.
So I feel like, are there legitimate concerns about, the security of devices being manufactured and assembled in countries outside the United States? Sure, absolutely. That's legitimate. And if that's the issue, right, there are ways to address that. Did Netgear and AdTran crack this supply chain security code? If so, that should be publicly available, right? What are they doing that suddenly makes what they were doing before not okay? Oh, now it's okay. What changed? Right. That's my big question.
Well, and we're saying the same thing, but there's also the case that the FCC has basically said, here are the hoops you have to jump through, and what they have failed to say is, and here's how these hoops actually improve the supply chain.
Exactly.
And so there's two separate things. It's like, did these guys just document what they were already doing to the satisfaction of the FCC? If that's all they did, that's fine. But why are those the requirements? And by the way, let's see how they scored on the requirements sheet. So
right.
Yeah, there's a lot of very curious fluff around all this, and FUD, I guess, is the way I would put it. So
yeah. Anyway, we have a ton of links regarding this in the show notes if you want to dig into it, all kinds of stuff, including what the FCC is requiring, a Global Electronics Association, really informative PDF about the supply chain and how distributed it is and how this is not a problem you can just magically make go away. So all kinds of details if you want to dig in. But we'll move on. Johnny, you have a Microsoft story.
I do. So on April 16th, Microsoft announced the availability of its Container Network Insights agent for users of Azure Kubernetes Services, or AKS. AKS networking has many layers: the Azure Container Networking Interface, the extended Berkeley Packet Filter, Cilium, Core DNS, Azure Network Policy Objects, Cilium Network Policy Objects, and Hubble for pod-level metrics. Each layer can fail silently in ways that the surrounding layers don't see. So the new agent integrates with the AKS MCP server for a standardized and what Microsoft claims is a secure interface to Kubernetes, to Cilium, and to Hubble. For visibility below the Kubernetes label, the agent collects kernel-level telemetry directly from cluster Linux nodes such as NIC ring buffer stats, kernel packet counters, soft IRQ distribution, and socket buffer utilization. It doesn't do anything. It just looks. It's an advice-only agent currently, but it will, over time, recommend fixes to the problems it identifies, but it can't, actually not over time. It currently will recommend fixes to the problems it identifies, but it will not implement them directly. So there's still a human-in-the-loop factor. If you want to go check out the new agent, it is in public preview in the Central US, East US, East US 2, West US 2, and UK South regions.
Whenever we talk Kubernetes, I feel like it's turtles all the way down. And the answer,
there you go.
The answer is always, some new agent, some new sidecar to do more observability, more monitoring of yet another process. And now we also probably need a way to monitor these new agents that are doing monitoring. So, wow. But obviously, I know if you're running critical infrastructure on this, if you're an SRE, maybe this kind of information is useful. So, but oof.
Yeah, well,
that's a lot of telemetry.
I think fail silently is possibly better replaced with fail invisibly, because basically the cool thing about this agent is unless it gets hacked, which is a big unless, it can't actually inject any other risks into the environment. And again, that's a big unless.
Yeah.
Because it's not actually doing anything. It's just telling you what's going on, which is devoutly to be wished, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah. All right, a couple of financial results, and then we'll wrap with some space networking. We'll start with ASML. This is the Dutch maker of advanced lithography equipment essential for microchip production. They reported financial results for their Q1 of 2026. Revenues were 8.8 billion euros, up 13% versus last year, with net income of 2.7 billion euros, up 17%. The company raised its full-year net sales outlook, forecasting up to 40 billion euros at the high end. That's up from the previous quarter's year-end forecast of 39 billion, so they are seeing a little bit more sales being eked out. However, CNBC reports that ASML's stock dipped 6% over concerns that proposed legislation in the U.S. is going to stop ASML from selling lower-end lithography systems to China. The company is already blocked from selling its highest-end equipment to China, but it does still have a fairly significant percentage of his net sales from these lower-end equipment. If that legislation does go through, that's definitely a hit to ASML.
Yep. And otherwise, it's just, hey, chips, and more chips. I mean, I would like to be ASML right now, to be honest.
Well, wait till you hear the next one.
Right?
So we're following up with chipmaker TSMC. They reported financial results for their Q1 2026. The company earned 1.13 trillion, yes, trillion with a T, new Taiwan dollars in revenue. That's equivalent to approximately 36 billion in US dollars. That revenue is up 35% year over year.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Net income was 572 billion new Taiwan dollars, up 58% year over year. I got to say, walking around being like, yeah, we just made a trillion. That's pretty.
Well, yes,
good.
but it's
I know.
It's a trillion new Taiwan, but yes, in a quarter, yes.
It's when you're throwing out the T word, that's still pretty good.
Yeah. Well, to me, honestly, I think it's the net income being up over almost 60%, because it's great to make money, but if you're spending all the money to make money, it's not all that exciting. But basically, they're just pocketing the cash. I mean, they are minting cash, these guys.
Yeah. And looking ahead, Q2 revenue is expected to be even higher than Q1. Although, as you mentioned, the company still is spending money. They expect its capital budget for the year to be somewhere between 52 and 56 billion in US dollars. Some of that capital spending is going to be going to adding a new fab in their Taiwan location and converting 5 nanometer tool into 3 nanometer in Taiwan. Overseas plants are also expected to start producing in volume. According to reporting from TechSoda, TSMC anticipates that volume production in its second Arizona fab will come online in the second half of 2027. And there's a plant in Japan that will see mass production at 3 nanometers in 2028. We talked about some bottlenecks earlier. For TSMC, those apply. There's supply chain disruptions from the U.S. and Israel's war with Iran, and from a lack of electricity capacity among customers who can get TSMC manufactured chips but don't have access to power to run them. So if those kind of delays start hitting folks trying to build out data centers, that eventually will come back on TSMC. But at the moment, it looks like several bright quarters ahead. So if you're trying to plan your exit of the AI infrastructure, now is not the time.
Yep, exactly. All right, so we'll wrap up with some space networking that harkens back to a little bit of a discussion we had earlier. Amazon is going to is actually buying satellite company Globalstar, and also as part of that deal, inking a deal with Apple to supply satellite services to Apple products. So here's the details. On April 14th, Amazon and satellite company Globalstar announced that Amazon will be acquiring Globalstar, adding Globalstar's direct-to-device D2D services to Amazon's own LEO satellite network now, in advance of rolling out its own D2D in 2028. And it may end up being instead of, we shall see, as well as taking over the mobile services spectrum and extending cellular coverage to customers beyond the reach of terrestrial networks. In related news, Amazon announced an agreement with premier Globalstar customer Apple for Amazon LEO power satellite services for iPhone and Apple Watch 1, including emergency SOS via satellite, extending Apple's existing relationship with Globalstar. So, back when I said phone companies really need to be paying attention to this, gosh, Amazon just ate your lunch, guys, because now your iPhone, should you have one, will be running across an Amazon network.
Potentially. I think these direct-to-device connections can be pretty expensive, which is why right now they're basically just for emergency use only. But I think long-term, you're right, there is potential disruption for the land-based telcos. And
it also makes logical sense to do like any kind of roaming agreement. So if you happen to be using that service, basically they'll try to route you on the cheap services where available. If you need to go over the expensive ones, they charge you. Works for me.
Yeah. It's also interesting that Amazon, I think it's smart of Amazon to buy an existing satellite provider with existing satellites in space because, the Project Leo is way behind Starlink and others. So it's got a lot of catching up to do. So buying your way into that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're, it almost feels like the past couple of months, Amazon has done I won't say quite a 180, but they seem to be tightening down everything, getting a lot more aggressive with all of these announcements that we're making. They're kind of realizing that they've been fat, dumb, and happy for too long, and now they're going to be lean, mean, and hungry. And that's not a bad thing for customers and enterprise users.
No, definitely not. And as I've said all along, I'm happy to see more competition in satellite broadband. We don't just want to leave it to one company. So if Amazon is the runner up here, they know how to compete, and it seems like they know what to do. I just feel bad for all the astronomers watching more and more satellites go into orbit and be like, ah.
Yeah, I feel bad for myself because you go up and you look at the sky and you're like, I missed my window of opportunity to learn the constellations because now it's basically, and that one's Starlink.
That's right. It's Orion Plus.
Yeah, right.
All right, that wraps up the news. Jono, where can folks get more from you?
Hit me up at nemerdes.substack.com. There's a Contact Us tab at the top. We're happy to hear from you, and we'll get back to you.
And I'm Drew Connery. I'm on Blue Sky at DrewCM and blogging at packetpushers.net. Thanks to our sponsor, NANOG, for sponsoring us, and thanks to you for listening. Don't forget, you can hit us up with questions, comments, concerns, queries, all of that at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU's for follow-up. We do love when listeners reach out, and if you want, we will address your concern, question, comment, whatever on the air. And by the way, we've got merch, more than a dozen podcasts. You can subscribe to our industry blog, 2 weekly newsletters, our community Slack group, a YouTube channel, an IRC group, and more. It's all at packetpushers.net. All free, no login required. As always, thanks for listening.